Today we've seen a lot of different plots and a lot of different things that we're looking at as far as different herbicide programs. We talk a lot about tank mixes and what products you can or cannot tank mix. One website that's going to be very important before you ever do any applications is to make sure your tank mix partner is an approved tank mix partner. So we got a website called enlisttankmix.com. It's a live website. It's a little different than enlist.com, although you can get there through enlist.com. But enlisttankmix.com shows all the current adjuvants, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, micronutrients, glyphosates, all the different products that you can legally tank mix. So I want to explain a little bit what that website does and doesn't show you. It's EPA mandated that we test tank mix partners to see if the tank mixing will increase driftable fines. Obviously we do not want to increase driftable fines so we don't have off-target movement. So what they do is they go to a wind tunnel down in Lincoln, Nebraska at the University of Nebraska. So they'll take Enlist 1 and they'll take a glyphosate, for instance. They'll tank mix them, spray them. If it does not increase driftable fines, then it gets approved and gets on the enlisttankmix.com website. So to be legal, it's got to be on that site. What it does not test for is just as important what it does test for, is it doesn't test for crop response, it doesn't test for weed control, it doesn't test for anything else, but it does test for the driftable fines. So you'll still have to work with your distributor partner, your retailer, your custom applicator on which tank mix partners and which adjuvants you want to be using. But that's exactly what that website does. But sometimes there'll be a product that you want to use that's not on there. And it's one of two things: either hasn't been tested or it did increase the driftable fines, so it didn't pass the EPA mandated protocol. So that's what that website shows, so it's pretty important to know that. A couple things we haven't talked about yet is we want to make sure we understand is when you look at the label, we have one line on wind speed. We want to be less than 15 miles per hour. That's the wind speed parameters on the label. We recommend 3 to 10. Obviously we don't want to be under a 3-mile-an-hour wind. If it's too calm, you can get air or temperature inversions where actually the small driftable fines under 150 micron size, they can actually stay suspended. Without air movement, the gravity doesn't get to pull them down, so they'll stay suspended. And then later, if the wind switches or something, you can get those to go off target. So we want at least a 3-mile-an-hour wind, recommend 3 to 10, but you can spray up to 15 miles per hour. When you look at the label, it'll recommend 10 to 15 gallons of water per acre. In my experience this year and a little bit last year, I think it's important to have enough water out there. The biggest issue we're having, if we're having any issues at all, is we're not getting good coverage. So it's so important to get good coverage. So if you're at 10 to 15 gallons of water, we want to be at that 15 gallons of water. If you're tank mixing with Liberty or a glufosinate type product, then that's a contact herbicide. So we want actually the water volume a little higher. So we're recommending 18 to 20 gallons of water if a glufosinate product is your tank mix partner. So err on the side of more gallons of water. More gallons gets better coverage. You compare 10 gallons to 15. 15 gallons is 50% more water. Yeah, you got to haul a little more out to the field, but that's giving you 50% more water for coverage. It's so important to get that good coverage for certain weeds. Most of the weeds, it doesn't really matter as much. I mean, anything on the label is going to be fine, but I'm finding on pigweed species and kochia that extra gallonage gives better coverage and gets better weed control. And we can get fantastic weed control if we up that gallonage a little bit. What we're trying to show here is we're doing different tank mixes with Enlist 1 at different height of weeds. Because we know we're targeting 6 inches or less weed height when we're spraying the Enlist 1. So we're looking at what different sized weeds are with different tank mix partners. Okay, so we'll start with the first one here. What we did here is the block nearest us, we sprayed 3 to 4 inch weeds. So that would be a timely, legal, what we recommend application. The middle block, we're spraying 8 to 12 inch weeds. So just a little higher than we want, a little off label, but it's not uncommon for a grower to have to do that. And then in the back plot, we're looking at 18 to 24 inch weeds, and we averaged about 18 inch tall water hemp. And this is water hemp right here that we're working with. So you could see the first tank mix partner, well, this wasn't a tank mix, it was just Durango with a layered residual, Ever Pre-X. And you can see on small weeds, medium-sized weeds, or the taller weeds, These are obviously glyphosate resistant water hemp, and the Durango, the straight glyphosate, didn't do too much to it. Okay, now let's go back. The next one, here we tank mixed Durango with Enlist 1 at 2 pints, the labeled rate, the rate we want to be using. And you can see on the small weeds, medium-sized weeds, and in the way in the back, the taller weeds. And we'll look at this in more detail in a minute. But you can see the timeliness of application. First of all, adding the 2,4-D really significantly increased the weed control. We also put Ever-Pre-X in all our applications here. The reason we did that, that's an S-metolachlor layered residual. And the reason I did it is because once you spray post, we're not counting on a lot of residual out of the 2,4-D or the glyphosate. So I wanted a layered residual down so we could actually see how well it did, and we didn't want new weeds emerging. But you can look, this was sprayed over 3 weeks ago, and about 4 weeks ago on the front one. And you can see that layered residual Ever-Pre-X. I mean, this is open. There's no crop canopy or anything here. And you could see how that layered residual, you see very few new germinating water hemp. You see a couple out here that just started, but not much water hemp germinating. So that really shows the value of that layered residual, more so than I expected. It was very impressive. And you can see the second block versus the third block. And you do, typically, the taller the weeds get, the tougher it is to control them because you got more growing points. Now I want to pull a weed here, and I want to show something as far as weed height. So you can follow me in. So we got a water hemp, we have a water hemp plant here. Okay, how tall would you say that is? So I put it down. It's about an 8-inch water hemp. So it's a little taller than the 6 inches we want, but that's 8 inches. But is that really 8 inches? To a herbicide and to a weed, you may think that's an 8-inch water hemp, but look at all the growing points. So I pull off a branch, okay? That branch alone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's about 12 growing points, but you got height. So I'm gonna lay that down. Got the next one, got another 6 or 7. You lay that down. So that grower applicator may thought he was working with an 8-inch water hemp, but to a herbicide, you got to add all these different heights of all these branches, auxiliary buds that have grown. Now you measure how tall that weed is. To a herbicide, this is how tall that weed is. That's why it's so important to get smaller weeds. You lay that out, we got about 33-inch tall water hemp. So to a herbicide and all the growing points on this, there's probably 25 to 30 growing points on this plant. 2,4-D is a growth regulator, so it's going to control growing points. And effectively, this is a 33-inch water hemp. So that's why when you're spraying weeds, typically when they're 6 inches, they're going to not have any of those side branches yet. So then you have less growing points and you can really control it. So that's why it's so important to be timely and spray early, 28, 30 days after planting. You want to get out there when those weeds are small, because that's not that wasn't a 8-inch water hemp. It's about a 33-inch water hemp. So it's very important to know that when you're talking about staging weeds and to get good weed control. This here is untreated. So this is we had no treatments at all at any weed height. So this is the pressure that we have out here for water hemp. Plenty of pressure. Here we have Liberty, straight Liberty with no enlist, and Ever-Pre-X again for the layered residual. And you can see when we sprayed the 3 to 4 inch weeds in the front. You can see the middle section where we had a little bit taller weeds, and then way in the back. And we'll actually go back there and look at that later. But you could see that obviously Liberty, fairly good on water hemp weed control. It's not perfect, nothing's perfect alone, but if you got just that going, you can see that, okay, the taller ones looks like it had better weed control. Well, we understand when we're spraying glufosinate, weather conditions play a lot of factors in that. You want, a little bit warmer weather. You don't want to spray the first 2 hours or the last 2 hours of the day. And we can, just in general, you can see the weed control. It is significantly better than the check. If we have real heavy pigweed species, palmer, water hemp. If the weeds are getting a little taller than we like, when we're dealing with kochia, those tougher to control weeds, this will be the preferred tank mix partner. So we'll have Enlist 1 at 2 pints, Liberty at 32 ounces or a quart, and then we again put the Ever Pre-X in for the layered residual. And you can see that combo versus straight Liberty, but you can see some differences when we get on some taller weeds. When you talk about different traded soybeans, you got the XtendFlex beans coming. Because the Liberty has to be sprayed at a separate pass versus dicamba, you'll see when we spray just Liberty, it's not as good as that tank mix. With Enlist, we can tank mix Enlist 1 with the Liberty, so you got your contact and your systemic working on the weed at the exact same time, and you can just see the improved weed control versus spraying them separate. That is a fantastic tank mix option. If you're timely on your weeds, you don't have those tougher weeds, Enlist 1 in a glyphosate like Durango will do a very excellent job. But if you get taller weeds or some more challenging weeds, this tank mix here will be probably your go-to that you'll want to recommend. So now I'd like to take you back and we'll look at some taller weeds. Just remember, I'm not recommending spraying on taller weeds, but I want to show you the differences if they do get taller. So now we're looking at the way off label, taller weeds. It was raining, we didn't have a chance to get in. The water hemp or Palmer grew quicker than we expected. Couldn't get the custom applicator in. Whatever reason, you got taller weeds. These averaged about 18 inches of all the weeds. This is Enlist 1 with Liberty with the Ever Pre-X as a layered residual. And you can see, did a pretty fair job, but there are some coming back. You're going to get some regrowth. I mean, when you get weeds that tall, there's so many growing points, as we talked earlier. You could have 30, 40 growing points on a plant. Very challenging to kill. But let's compare that to a straight Liberty on too tall of weeds. These burnt the tops off pretty good to start with, but the regrowth has been tremendous. I mean, there's just a lot of regrowth. Effectively didn't get very good weed control. And we talk about timing, how important it is. If you compare that with just weeds that are 8 inches tall versus 18 inches tall, look at the difference in weed control. Again, it's so important to get timely applications on the weed height. Again, we're always recommending 6 inches or less. The layered residual of Ever Pre-X or an S-metolachlor product, I mean, if we didn't have a layered residual out here, this would be a green mat with a bunch of small water hemp coming back. But the layered residual really held them back very, very well. So the reason for putting Ever Pre-X in, it was more showy than I expected. So if you have a pre-herbicide, and these didn't have any pre's, there was no sonic on this. So if you had a pre plus layered residual along with your regular program, you're going to get very good weed control. And it's key to be timely on weed height.